It's time to share my top 3 secret wide grip pull-ups, the exact ones I'm currently doing to keep leveling up my back, my best body part. But before we get started, let's quickly clear up some confusion regarding arm paths for lat training. See, most lifters have been taught to keep their elbows tucked close during pulling compounds, like doing underhand pull downs or Yates rows, to emphasize shoulder extension, squeezing the lats low, thus minimizing upper back retraction. Generally, this makes sense. But what's rarely discussed is shoulder adduction, another critical function of the lats, achieved in vertical frontal plane pulling. So if you're doing a horizontal pull with flared elbows, you're mostly working the entire traps, rear delts, and rhomboids because this emphasizes scapular retraction. However, with a wide grip on a vertical pull, you directly work the lats through shoulder adduction by bringing your upper arm directly towards your sides. To keep things simple, there are 2 equally effective ways to train the lats. Close arms, either neutral or underhand, tucked in front of the body, so pulling towards your belly button or hips, best done diagonally, but still works in the frontal plane like on pull-ups and typical lat pull downs. And 2, wide arms pronated or neutral, directly driving the lat fibers from origin to insertion, since the lats attach to the spine. This is best done in the frontal plane, which is the focus of today's video. And you can even test this yourself. Flare your arms out to about the 10 and 2 o'clock positions. Then crunch your elbows straight into your obliques. You'll immediately feel your lats cramping as long as the pulling angle stays vertical. That is a defining factor. This does not apply to horizontal pulls. It has to be vertical. So everyone talks about following the muscle fibers when it comes to incline pressing. So you're pressing diagonally up toward your clavicular fibers, or pressing high to low for the costal fibers, right? Same for the traps. The fibers run more horizontally, so influencers recommend Kelso shrugs or wider grip shrugs to better match that direction. But then they somehow fail to make that connection with the lats. If you look at lat anatomy, their fibers attach to the spine and fan outward. So follow the fibers by spreading those wings wide in the bottom and pulling those elbows tightly in. It's lats first, okay? This is exactly why wide grip pull-ups build massive lats, and explains why silver era bodybuilders abuse them. They weren't doing wide grip pull-ups for upper back thickness. It's also why the biomechanics crowd from around 2019 to 2022 got it completely backwards. 3 years of misinformation that many lifters, including myself, briefly fell for. Despite the lies of calling it upper back pull downs and upper back pull-ups, I accidentally kept getting wider. So I'd already been a pull-up specialist for years, but including old school wide grip chins, as the OGs call them, changed everything. And I tell you, the fitness community was shocked by my width gains. And since then, I've become a massive promoter of wide grip pull-ups, continuously refining and rotating variations to maximize results. So based on my experience, the results from top natural bodybuilders, and what we know about physiology, you can absolutely build your lats through wide grip pull-ups. Now, one more point before I explain the variations. Understand that pull-ups have rarely failed to build world-class natural backs. However, modern exercise science indicates that training the lengthened position is generally more hypertrophic, particularly with exercises that have less than ideal resistance profiles. So if an exercise is already emphasizing the mid to lengthened range, further optimization won't help much. But improving that which is heavily shortened bias typically does lead to better gains, even if the difference is marginal. It might be 5 to 10% at most. Now, this definitely applies to back training, since most traditional movements are limited by the shortened sticking point. That's why Prime Fitness, an expensive brand that I'm not affiliated with, offers rowing and pull down machines with adjustable resistance profiles. They were the first to do this. For optimal back training, you'd ideally set the plates on the beginning lengthened setting. This way, the movement is easiest at the top, where you're weakest, and hardest at the bottom, where you're strongest, and you're able to handle more weight that way. But again, I must point out that most of the greatest backs in history were not built with lengthened bias free weighted exercises. It's also why cheat reps are so common. Only a few free weighted exercises fall into this category, like T-bar rows, which I covered in this video, inverted rows, and rack chins. So then, here is my ultimate question. What if you could take more traditional lifts, like weighted pull-ups, and adjust them to become more lengthened biased? Could this benefit advanced lifters who've stalled and are chasing those final gains? I believe it would. Just imagine tweaking an already highly effective mass builder that has an imperfect resistance profile. What do you get? Well, that brings me on to the calf jump chin to bar wide grip pull-up, or the CJ pull-up. Think of CJ from San Andreas, bunny hopping on a bike. Or perhaps I should call it the Leonidas pull-up. Let me know your thoughts on the name. See, as I mentioned earlier regarding shoulder adduction, you're already getting that here. But one easily overlooked aspect is the grip itself and how that affects range of motion. So let's cover that first. With wide grip pull-ups, always use a bar that has a slight camber at the ends. If you attempt this on a straight bar, like those monkey bar setups at CrossFit gyms, your wrist will feel terrible due to misalignment with the forearms. As your grip widens, your wrists naturally prefer a slight downward angle, especially on a fixed bar. But aside from comfort, range of motion matters equally, if not more. Typically, getting your chin just above the bar with your head tilted back is considered full range. This ensures the top end sticking point doesn't overly limit your reps, because logically speaking, pulling your chest all the way to the bar, so clavicle level, represents true full ROM. So anything less is technically a partial, right? Well, here's the issue. Consistently attempting chest bar pull-ups dramatically reduces your strength and rep count, because the shortened sticking point becomes exponentially more challenging as you pull higher and pack on heavier weights. You're physiologically weaker in this range due to the faulty resistance profile. So even if you were able to still get your chin right over the bar, the moment you can go a little bit higher than that, the set ends prematurely. But did your back muscles truly hit muscular failure? Absolutely not. So that's why if you're gonna do that exercise, make sure to do normal ROM as a drop set finisher. So the point is that there's a sweet spot, typically chin right over the bar, which lifters have used as standard for years because it clearly defines a range of motion, especially in competitive environments like street lifting. That said, here's another overlooked problem. If you're doing wide grip pull-ups on a camber bar, you'll notice that bringing your chin over the bar feels closer to pulling toward your clavicle, providing an extended squeeze. That's because the camber positions the bar about 2 inches higher than a straight bar, forcing you into a deeper pull and significantly increasing the difficulty at the top. Also, with a wide grip, your arms naturally can't bend as much. So if you attempt to pull too high, you might get some compensation with some internal rotation at the top, causing you to lose back tightness and your biceps kick into overdrive, especially with the resultant force at the elbow. Now, some influencers might argue that because the shoulder adduction component is so important, you should maximally drive your elbows into your sides and avoid reducing the top end range of motion, especially since the lats have better leverage in this position. That's a good point, but if you closely examine my sets, even though I'm not pulling extremely high, my elbows are clearly driving toward my sides well past a 90-degree arm angle. Yet I'm only bringing my chin to the bar. So it's false to correlate elbow bend directly with your chin passing over the bar when using a wide grip. The same form cues simply don't apply to this lift. That's just the nature of wide grips. Therefore, this slight partial at the top already represents the terminal active range for your lats. So if you want to pull your arms even closer into your sides, the solution wouldn't necessarily be pulling higher. That's actually the least effective way due to the shortened strength curve. Instead, you'd want to use equipment like rings or cables, which offer more lateral freedom, but you don't have to pull higher. All we need is more sideways motion, not upwards motion. Another important consideration is that with a wide grip, you're naturally limiting humeral elevation. So the lats generally have their best leverage around 120 degrees of shoulder flexion. And by widening your grip, you're obviously slightly reducing this angle compared to narrower grips. But here's the key point I've been leading to. The chin over the bar standard is exaggerated. You don't actually need it. What I'm recommending might sound controversial, but it's simply bringing your chin directly to the bar, not necessarily above it. Interestingly, and I know I reference prisoners a lot, they figured this out a long time ago. They might not understand formal biomechanics, but after thousands of pull-ups, doing so every day, they concluded that staying in the pocket with a wide grip was the best for building wide wings. They're absolutely right. It really works due to ticking all the biomechanical boxes, especially when you're strong. Pull-ups are always limited by the shortened position at the top end. And this becomes especially noticeable once you're pulling over plate for reps with a wide grip. Personally, I can explosively pull 4 plates with every grip except for super wide, and even hold the top. But if I add just a few more pounds, I'll still be explosive out of the bucket, but I might experience an immediate sticking point at the mouth and nose level. And that's purely due to the ascending strength curve, kind of like the sport of geared powerlifting. So by intentionally stopping just short of that sticking point and focusing on grooving into the bottom range where your back is doing all the work, you fully unlock your lat strength potential. And with a wide grip, you're getting an ideal lat contraction without excessive elbow bend. That's one of the benefits in making more lengthened buys. I mean, it's not really, but practically it makes sense. So when you combine this slightly reduced top end range of motion with a bit of a calf raise, you create a perfectly smooth resistance profile. That's exactly why this exercise is genius. It's essentially the push press of pull-ups, the calisthenics equivalent. Now, some of you might argue that adding momentum from the bottom emphasizes a shortened position, but that's inaccurate. The entire rep feels heavy from top to bottom, regardless of leg drive. The top is just easier, which is what you want. And if all this talk about the lats having good leverage at the top is true, then there should be no cons in heavily loading that portion. Plus, you still fully control the negative, providing a powerful way to stretch overload. Remember, we're dealing with an exercise inherently limited by the shortened position at the top. A good comparison here is cheat rows. You're intentionally handling heavier net weight with a corrected resistance profile, meaning you're still emphasizing the lengthened position. Now, if you were using the same weights as your strict sets, then sure, there might be a problem. But the whole point is to overload with momentum to smooth out the faulty strength curve. And if this wasn't true, again, nobody would bother doing cheat rows or power lateral raises. The only time momentum becomes problematic is when an exercise is already lengthened biased and you skip that range completely, like doing a push press with tons of leg drive. And imagine that's like a mini quarter squat, not just getting a little rebound off your calves. So in this case, you're using something subtle like a calf block, mat, plow box, or even being flat on the ground, just to provide a slight bounce out of the bottom. It's a minor calf raise, not a full jump, which is a different exercise. I do jumping ring chins specifically for lockout strength and biceps, not bottom end strength. I'm doing 4 plates on that exercise. Here, if you can do 2 plates, strict wide grip pull-ups, you'll do a little bit over 100 pounds with the calf cheating technique. That's it. So lifting your heels up still feels extremely heavy at the bottom. Don't kid yourself. Plus, you'd be surprised how many lifters unintentionally do this already, especially during max effort pull-ups where they jump into the starting position. Very few lifters pause completely doing a dead stop. Most rebound quickly between reps, achieving a similar overloading effect. And no one's ever complained about this being problematic for building a big back. So I'm just recommending you intentionally include this mini calf raise for controlled overloading, and then bring your chin directly to the bar to standardize the range of motion and bias the lats with no sticking point. That's it. I'm telling you from experience, this might be your only way to comfortably surpass 2 plates. Wide grip pull-ups are super hard, and you'll only be lifting 10% more than your strict version. So jumping with the wide grip is your primary overloader. You should open your workout with this because it'll take a lot out of you. and prime the nervous system. After which, definitely do back down sets with stricter form, and you have plenty of good options here. You can use the normal wide grip pull-up or chin to bar without momentum, or you could try another variation. Still with a bar now, but pulling behind the neck. Now, many people assume that behind the neck pull-ups don't bias the lats because you can visually see the traps contracting hard at the top. But logically, it's still a frontal plane pull with essentially the same arm path, assuming your grip width is consistent. Though I found that a normal wide grip feels better than super wide here. The advantage of this variation is that you're pulling straight vertically and even slightly forward, basically the opposite of leaning back, which can happen when the weight gets heavy on normal wide grip pull-ups. For example, you know those pull-up and dip towers at the gym with super wide handles? When you do pull-ups on that, the problem is that your torso could swing around freely, inevitably causing you to lean back when fatigue kicks in or the loads get too heavy. But with behind the neck pull-ups, leaning back becomes physically impossible. I prefer this because you don't need external form cueing. It's built directly into the exercise itself. I don't like it when influencers say, "It's on you, bro." No, we need exercises that can only be executed one way to guarantee we're hitting the target musculature. And behind neck pull-ups, groove in the correct movement pattern because you're 100% vertical or even leaning slightly forward. Sure, you might get a bit more upper back when you do that, and that's fine. But it still remains heavily lat biased because you can't accidentally turn it into a hybridized inverted row. It literally can't be done. Like, consider the extreme opposite scenario. If you lean back so far that your torso is parallel to the floor, now you're doing an inverted row pull-up. No longer vertical pull at all. So remember what I said at the start. You have to stay vertical to effectively work shoulder adduction with a wide grip. If you convert this movement into a horizontal pull by driving your elbows backwards, it immediately shifts the emphasis towards the upper back. So this misunderstanding is exactly where many lifters get it wrong. It's also why behind the neck pull-ups cannot be upper back biased. Doing so would contradict basic angles and movement mechanics. That's also why behind the neck pull-ups are so strict. They separate hardcore lifters from soft weaklings. The calisthenics goons versus the pencil necks. Also, whatever reps you can do on regular wide grip pull-ups, slash them in half and prepare to lift significantly less weight. For this reason, I prefer to finish my vertical pulls with this variation. Typically, I'll do something like 2 sets of CJ pull-ups or regular wide grip pull-ups, then 1 burnout set of behind the neck pull-ups. Or like last year, 2 sets of weighted chins, followed by 2 sets of behind the neck pull-ups as a complementary pull. So you always want to do a different angle or an overloader followed by an underloader. Technically, you can also replicate this with a lat pull down, but there's one major difference. On lat pull downs, you're seated in front of the cable. So the line of pull is never perfectly vertical. To achieve a pure vertical pull, you'd have to face away from the cable stack, which is why a lot of old school bodybuilders did them that way, but usually with light weight. Because the deal breaker is that you sacrifice stability since you can't effectively lock your legs down, thus limiting progression. So there's a difference depending on which direction you're facing, primarily due to the direction of resistance. Whereas with free weight gravity, guess what? It always feels right, and progression potential is unlimited. So behind the neck pull-ups guarantee a pure frontal plane pull. No leaning back, because then it's no longer behind the neck and you'd feel that right away because you turn into a regular wide grip pull-up and you simply pull until the back of your head touches the bar. Done. Another huge benefit is improved behind the neck mobility. This exercise significantly opens up your shoulders, directly transferring over to behind the neck presses and pull-up bars, unlocking specific positional strength. DLs claim they're dangerous, but in reality, you're strengthening your weakest positions. And remember, you're only as strong as your weakest link. Weak things break, as Louis Simmons used to say. Plus, the sheer difficulty alone makes them worthwhile. See, everybody raves about the stimulus to fatigue ratio for hypertrophy. Well, this exercise ticks every box. It's a standardized frontal plane pull that improves mobility and uniquely targets your lats without forcing you to lift super heavy. For most of you, body weight alone is enough. Not to mention, it's Jason Statham approved. Literally his signature exercise in movies because they look so cool. So what I recommend is keeping your head neutral at the bottom, then slightly leaning forward as you pull yourself up. Or just keep your chin tucked the entire time. Almost like an in and out motion. Once you master this technique, it's going to feel super smooth and you're going to love the back contractions. Now let me share one more variation of the wide grip pull-up. The wide grip ring pull-up. If you've been paying attention, you'll realize that using rings amplifies all the biomechanical factors I discussed earlier. On paper, you could even argue it's the perfect wide grip pull-up, minus the fact that it's not lengthened biased. Although it is possible to apply some calf drive if your rings are set high enough and you can keep your legs straight. Regardless, since rings aren't restrictive, they're naturally the easiest wide grip pull-up on your joints. Literally every lifter can do these pain-free. You won't develop armpit or shoulder overuse, nor will you require exceptional shoulder mobility. You also don't need a specialized camber bar, which makes rings perfect for lifters stuck using straight bars. And ring pull-ups can be done anywhere. On a tree branch, adjustable pull-up bar, playground, you name it. Biomechanically, this is the most optimal choice since you're pulling purely in the frontal plane with the rings directly out to your sides, never coordinating around a fixed bar, and easier to learn than doing it off a pull-up tower. It's more intuitive, and if you maintain strict form, you'll achieve pure lat activation. You're directly performing shoulder adduction by bringing your arms straight into your sides with the rings moving inward toward your spine. They follow your arm path. The straps move laterally, similar to how a cable direction will change. So the only other way to replicate this would be awkwardly attempting this on, say, a cable crossover machine or a functional trainer with something very heavy on your lap for stability, or a custom lat pull down machine. Like my old gym had something similar, but even that machine pulled a bit from the front, not purely from the sides. So rings solve this issue entirely. It's a real frontal plane pull with the rings accommodating the lat fiber's origin to insertion arm path. This is as good as it gets, and you'll feel your lats more than any other area. There's also a secret bonus at the bottom. You know how wide grip pull-ups limit human elevation, where the lats have their best leverage so there's still tension in the bottom, so long as you don't dead hang? Well, here's the trick. If you twist your pinkies outward, so away from your body, at the bottom, you'll achieve an even more intense stretch because the rings also rotate upward. Try it without even pulling yourself up. Just hang at the bottom and then rotate your pinkies away from you, like pouring water. You'll immediately get more length in your lats without doing anything with your arms. So you're rotating out on the bottom and then a bit more in towards the top so that you get your elbows closer to your sides. That's the movement pattern. And doing this mimics the legendary Larry Scott pull-down bar, which you can still buy online today for over $200. It's essentially a flipped up camber bar. Historically speaking, that variation was hard on the wrist, which makes sense given the alignment, and it's inaccessible for most of you. It's a forgotten secret, similar to the original rounded preacher bench, which was superior, but I digress. The point is, rings solve every possible concern, allowing you to replicate the Larry Scott bar effect by simply turning your pinkies outward slightly at the bottom for that intense weighted stretch without causing any weird restrictions. Remember, they're gonna move with you. It's not gonna feel bad on the joints. Honestly, if you're serious about building wide lats, and I did talk about this back in 2021 before anyone else, the wide grip ring pull-up is a strong choice. You're going to be noticeably weaker on this variation, but it has an incredible stimulus to fatigue ratio. For context, my max on these is around 2 plates for 6 reps, compared to 2 plates for 15 reps on weighted chin-ups. About a third weaker for rep work. Now here's one more important loading tip. You'll either need a very high pull-up bar or a shorter loading pin to achieve full range of motion. So I specifically bought a 2-inch loading pin for this exercise. This doesn't hold much weight, but that's fine given the difficulty of the exercise. See, if your loading pin or daisy chain is too long, the 45-pound plate will always hit the ground at the bottom because your knees are naturally closer to the floor. Ideally, You want the plate horizontal and barely skimming the ground at full extension. If your setup is too long, you'll prematurely limit your range of motion, which is fine for intentional jumping pull-ups, but not ideal for strict ring pull-ups. You don't want to cheat yourself out of the bottom stretch, so getting that shorter loading pin is essential. All you have to do here is pull yourself straight up while scooping the rings inward. And wherever that sticking point kicks in is your full range of motion. You'll know if you pull too high because you'll lose that back tightness. So don't overthink it, just keep your torso stable without swinging forward or backwards, and rotate your pinkies hard at the bottom. This alone will demolish your lats like nothing else, and you'll barely even need weight. The only minor downside is that you won't be able to grip quite as wide as other variations, but it's certainly wide enough. As long as your arms remain relatively diagonal, you're good. Now, if your wingspan is insane and your forearms look vertical, regular wide grip pull-ups might be better. And that's exactly why I recommend mixing in all three variations. Each one makes up for the limitations of the others. Plus, it keeps your training fresh, more sustainable, and lowers the risk of overuse injuries. This trio, the wide grip pull-up trifecta, is something I personally live on year-round, and I know you'll love it too. So enjoy those novelty width gains, and if you want a part 2 where I cover the best tucked shoulder extension pull-ups, comment down below, more pull-ups, and I'll talk to you guys next time.